Hello everyone, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today I'm going to be talking about a game which was announced just yesterday. So really we know very little, but I did want to bring it to all of your attention in case you were unaware. I picked up on it kind of quickly after it was announced, but there was a little bit of initial confusion, and it's still relatively new information. I don't usually do breaking news, but regardless of the fact, I did want to kind of talk about that, and that's because it's a big departure for the Total War series. So, as you may already know, the game that I'm going to be talking about is Total War 3 Kingdoms, which is the next sort of fully featured Total War game, and it's coming out later this year, supposedly in autumn or September. So I've seen both of those thrown around, of 2018. And it's kind of a big deal because most of last year, the Total War group or Creative Assembly had kind of been downplaying the next historical release. They'd done Warhammer, I believe it was, and had kind of ventured into Fantasyland with their newest fully featured games. They did announce that there'd be these Total War Saga games that would be coming out, which would be tightly focused historical games looking at narrow periods of history, sort of key turning points of history, and one of those is coming out hopefully shortly. That's Thrones of Britannia, which will be looking at the British Isles during the conflicts between the Saxons and the Vikings and whatnot. But this game, Three Kingdoms, appears to be the next fully featured Total War game. What I mean by that, in terms of fully featured, is sort of I don't know the best way of saying it other than flagship release. So like Total War Rome 2 is a flagship release, but all the expansions like Empire Divided were not. Total War Attila wasn't really, I don't know if that was a standard bearer or not. It was really largely based off Rome. So really Total War Rome 2, Medieval 2, Rome 1, Medieval 1, Shogun 1 and 2, those are sort of the standard bearers of the Total War franchise. And it's kind of exciting to see Three Kingdoms because for the first time ever, Total War is going to be moving to Asia, but not looking at Japan. So Total War has had games that look at Japan, the Shogun games, but they've never, to my knowledge anyway, ventured off the islands of Japan and looked at China, which is rich and replete with history and conflicts and whatnot, although often doesn't get looked at so much from our own Western perspective. Being an American, we don't tend to focus too much on Chinese history. It's kind of a passing comment, a footnote in a lot of our historical, novels growing up, or rather textbooks. And most of our games and our culture, they might touch on China, but they don't really focus on it. So it's kind of exciting to see a game look at that, and they're going to be looking at China during the Three Kingdoms period of time. Specifically, they've said the game, at least according to the description on Steam, the year is 190 CE. So 190 CE, I believe that's also 190 AD, but essentially it's taking place during the early period of the transition to the Three Kingdoms. And this is interesting for a few reasons. First of all, the Three Kingdoms is kind of one of the more romanticized periods in Chinese history. The Han Dynasty was dying. There was a child emperor on the throne, but really he was a puppet of this sort of dictator or military junta or military general, Dong Zhuo, who was, again, at least in Chinese culture, portrayed as being this sort of dictator and abuser of power, and he's sort of controlling what's left of this dynasty of Chinese history, which had spanned more than, I believe, 400 years, dating back to 200 BC, which was sort of often regarded in ancient Chinese history as sort of the golden era of Chinese power and sort of the expansion of the Chinese state. It was really the one of the longer-lasting Chinese dynasties, and also the second one, but sort of the first where China really exerted itself within a single dynasty over a long period of time. So this period of Han China is slowly dying, and there's this military despot in charge, and all of a sudden, a group of three families sort of rise up to oppose this despot. They're known as the Three Kingdoms, and these three groups all fight against the despot, but then they also end up sort of warring with each other. And China ends up being sort of fractionalized, almost in this sort of empire-divided Roman way, for a period of about 60 years. It was divided from 220 at the fall of Han, so they, spoiler alert, for history that's almost 2,000 years old, they overthrow the leader Dan Xiu, and then they sort of coexist or war with each other in a sort of quasi-state of independence for about 60 years, from 220 to about 280, when the Jin dynasty comes on the scene and replaces them. And this period of time, these 60 years, were a period of rapid technological change, and again, they were romanticized in a novel called The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which turned into a very successful video game series of itself. No, the video game series was not based on the novel. The novel was written hundreds of years before video games were a thing, but there's a series of video games looking at the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. I believe, who actually develops that? There was a release of it actually that came out last year, I think it was, and it's made by Koei Tecmo Games. So some of you familiar with sort of older PC games in the U.S. might be familiar with Koei, but they've in recent years they've shied away from the American market so much. But in any event, Romance of the Three Kingdoms is this long, like 20-volume long history or game that puts you in the shoes of these three kingdoms as they sort of war with each other and vie for power. But there's also periods of peace in there as well, where they sort of coexist more closely, where they overthrow Dan Xiu. But in any event, without me rambling too much, this is interesting for a few reasons. One, it's a fascinating period of Chinese history. It's very important to China to this day, and it's a period of history and, frankly, a region of conflict which the Total War series has always ignored, so it'll be a nice change of pace. Two, there have been a few games that look at the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, but nothing in this sort of way, of this sort of Western studio taking a really, I don't know if detailed is the right word, but a really concerted look at it in a tactical combat sort of way. The only games I'm aware of anyway have tended to be more perhaps rooted in expertise, with actually Asian studios looking at it, and those types of games tend to get ignored more in the Western market. And also because it's a more narrow focus. When you think of the flagship games of Total War, and I left out Empire and Napoleon earlier, but when you think of the flagship games of Total War, outside of Napoleon Total War, most of these games are games that are taking place over hundreds of years. And I don't see this game lasting hundreds of years. Even if it starts in 190 AD, while the Han China dynasty is still sort of clinging to life under this military dictatorship and a child emperor in charge. And then you go into the Three Kingdoms. The Jin come on the scene by 280 and have replaced the Three Kingdoms. So what you're really looking at is about 90 years of potential history and gameplay. Maybe a little bit longer if you fight the Jin back, or maybe a little bit less if you win earlier, but only about 90 years. So my hunch is that they'll probably keep with the 4 turns per year approach that they've done in some of their more narrow-focused games, to have closer on 400 turns rather than a mere, what would it be? The 2-turn approach would be closer to around 200 turns, which would be a little bit short for a full release of a Total War game. Additionally, I think it's kind of interesting because they could go maybe a little bit before, sort of in the decline and the internal strife that's going on during Han China, and maybe a little bit after. I'm not really sure what the expansions will look like for this. But in any event, I'm really intrigued, and I think it's a interesting departure. If I had to redo my top 5 list of 2018, this would certainly be on it. I don't know if Thrones of Britannia would fall off, or if something else would fall off. But I'm excited to see this. I'm excited for a change, and I guess we'll see. I'm going to have to do some reading up on history in the next couple of months over the Chinese period. And this, I think it'll be interesting to have some historical discussions. Of course, I'm still way behind on that series of Empire Divided, which I am still planning on doing as well. But nonetheless, guys, I did want to talk to you about this game, which was just announced yesterday. And let me know your thoughts. Is this something you're intrigued by? I know a lot of people have kind of grown stale with the Total War series, but this seems like a breath of fresh air. So I'm excited, but I'm interested in hearing back from you. With that being said, guys, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this video up. This is the Historical Gamer saying thank you for watching, and until next time, I'm out.